tomb where he lay. See the stone roll away. He is risen, he is risen, he's alive. See his hands, see his feet, touch his scars and believe. He is risen, he is risen, he's alive. Oh, he's alive. He lives. All honor and power are his. All glory forever. Amen. Jesus lives. Hear the shackles breaking free. Hear the song of the redeemed. He is moving, he is moving, he's alive. Take this freedom, take this love. Can you feel it rising up? He is here, he is here, he's alive. Oh, he lives. All honor and power are his. All glory forever. Amen. Jesus, he lives. All honor and power are his. All glory forever. Amen. Jesus lives. Jesus lives. You took all our shame, you left it in the grave. We're forgiven, we're forgiven. The work forever done, only by the blood. It is finished, it is finished. You took all our shame, left it in the grave. We're forgiven, we're forgiven. The work forever done, only by the blood. It is finished, it is finished. He lives. All honor and power are his. All glory forever. Amen. Jesus, oh, he lives. All honor and power are his. All glory forever. Amen. Jesus lives. Oh, my Jesus, he lives.
Who can heal the blind man? Oh, who can raise the dead? Who can part the waters? Set my feet on dry land? Who secures my future? Oh, who forgives my past? Who tears the veil of darkness and tramples over death? No one, no Jesus, there is one love that saves us. Hey, one that saves us. Ooh, yeah. No power on earth, come on. No power on earth could ever stop what you have started. No other love could ever take your place. You spoke a word and made a mockery of darkness. There is no rival standing in your way. No power on earth could ever stop what you have started. No other love could ever take your place. You spoke a word and made a mockery of darkness. There is no rival standing in your way. No power on earth could ever stop what you have started. No other love could ever take your place. You spoke a word and made a mockery of darkness. There is no rival standing in your way. No one but Jesus. There is one love that saves us. No one but Jesus. There is one love that saves us. Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everybody. You guys can go ahead and be seated. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for those of us who are joining online. We are so glad that you could come here and worship with us as a family this morning. We're especially glad for those of you who are worshiping with us for the very first time. So if you're checking out our church for the very first time, why don't you let us know that you're here by texting the word guest to the number 94090. This just gives us an opportunity to reach back out to say hello and to thank you for being here. We'd really love that opportunity to start that conversation, to get to know you this morning. We also have another text service called FL Respond. This is for anybody who's come here today with questions about maybe what it means to be a follower of Christ, or maybe you want to know more about what it means to be part of the family here at First Lubbock. You can text FL Respond, all one word, to 94090 at any point in time today during the service, or later this afternoon, or any time later this week. We would love to have those conversations with you. We'd love to start talking to you. We'd love to start walking through that with you. So take some time to do that if you feel that urge today. Want to remind you that we share the live stream of the service every single week on our Facebook page. You can head over to Facebook right now. You can click the share button and use the hashtag exposed as we are continuing on our sermon series of prophecy and pandemics. We're excited to be encouraged and challenged this morning by Bobby, and we want you to be able to encourage and challenge your Facebook audience as well. So take some time, share the live stream, and use the hashtag exposed. Also want to remind you that we are currently in the midst of a very long prayer initiative here at First Lubbock. It's something that's been on our hearts since back in March. We long to be a people who continue to pray for not only for our leaders and in our community here in Lubbock, but we're praying for revival in the church at large across the globe, that we would wake up, that we would awaken and be everything the Lord is calling us to be. And you can keep track of the things that we're praying for. You can join us as you wake up every single morning over at Facebook, Instagram, and firstlubbock.org/awaken.
Would you stand with us? Let's continue to worship our Jesus.
Oh Lord, you're my shepherd. You make me lie in fields of green. You lead me by still waters. You restore righteousness to me. Though I walk through the valley, I will fear no evil thing, for you are with me and you comfort me. And surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. And surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. And surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Lord, you're my shepherd. You make me lie in fields of green. You lead me by still waters. You restore righteousness to me. Though I walk through the valley, I will fear no evil thing, for you are with me, God, and you comfort me. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm gonna dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I'm gonna dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Goodness, mercy, wherever I go. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go. Surely goodness, love, and mercy will pursue me wherever I go.
The fact that God pursues me each and every day with his love, his goodness, and mercy is one of the most profound realities of life. In fact, it may be one of the very most encouraging things to me about who God is in my life. He is always, always with me. If he's pursuing me, he's always with me. That gives me hope, and that gives me calm assurance, come what may, even in the middle of this craziness in which we live today. Got me to thinking the other day, what if I lived as though that were true? That God is always with me. Would it change the way I think? Would it change the words that I use? Would it change the way I act? And sadly, my conclusion was absolutely What's really odd about that is, yes, he's always with me. He most definitely is. So it would follow then that I would act like that. So let's try that for this next few minutes. The rest of the time we're here this morning, maybe, let's shoot for the stars for the rest of our lives. Let's begin now, deciding that we're going to think, act, and speak as though Jesus were right beside us. Because he is. And let's see what God will do with us as we give our everything to him, even as we worship him in this place he has made holy, as he does every place because of his presence. Let's worship as we sing.
Jesus, you change everything. Lies here, home found here now. Jesus, you change everything. Changed for fear, thou here now. Jesus, you change everything. Life healed, whole, found here now. Jesus, you change everything.
right, thank you guys. As you're being seated this morning, I want you to take your Bible, your smart device, whatever it is you use to follow along, and I want us to look at the book of Jonah this morning. You need to hear another voice besides the voice of Isaiah that we have been hearing the past 4, 5, 6 months, and really, you're going to hear the most effective sermon that's ever been preached in history. Jonah had a measure of success not experienced by any of the other prophets. In fact, you look at the other prophets in Scripture, the major and minor, none of them had the kind of success. I see a lot of scrambling looking for Jonah. Let me give you a big target. Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. I think that gives you a bigger target to shoot at. I mean, Jonah's just one page in my Bible, just kind of four short chapters there. So Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. All right, that should get you in the general area. Jonah's the only prophet in Scripture where the people responded in a positive way. He was Israel's first foreign missionary, if you will. The other 11 prophets in the Old Testament that we have, they had the privilege of staying home in preaching on their home court. They had a home court advantage, which is really a disadvantage because the people didn't listen to them. God's people didn't listen. But here is Jonah. He goes begrudgingly to preach a message to the Ninevites. Nineveh was a major city in Assyria. Assyria, of course, Assyrians were a hated and despised people. Israel was a vassal of Israel for as long as anyone could remember. Israel has paid tribute to Assyria. And now God calls Jonah to go and preach a message to the Ninevites, a pagan people. And the response is overwhelming. It leads to a national revival in Assyria. I want to read the story first before we get to the sermon. But let me do this first. Let me read the sermon to you. All right, the sermon begins in Jonah chapter 3 and verse 4. The good news is the sermon also ends in chapter 3 and verse 4. It is the shortest sermon you will ever hear. Amen. Good grief. Thanks for that encouragement. Feel like the other prophets now. Here's the sermon right here. Then Jonah began to go through the city one day's walk and cried out and said, this is it. Yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. That's it. That's the sum total of the sermon right there. Now, there's a lot before we get there. And I want to read the narrative. And the beauty of these Old Testament narratives is you really don't need a sermon to understand them. They're such rich stories that you find in the Old Testament. The greatest benefit is just reading the story and hearing the story. And I don't want to assume that you know the story of Jonah, that you've heard it. The majority of you probably do. But I just remember being a new believer. You know, as a 21-year-old college student, not growing up in church, I didn't know all these old Bible stories. And it would always bother me as a new believer whenever the pastor would just make a cursory reference to some Bible story, and they would say, well, I'm not going to read that because everybody in here knows that. Well, I'm not going to assume that you know that because I didn't know that. I didn't know the story. But it is a visually rich story. The story of Jonah. Go back with me to chapter 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. Then the sailors became afraid and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, lain down and fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you are sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us so that we will not perish." I find it interesting that a pagan is telling a man of God that he needs to pray about the situation. That's probably a sermon in itself. Each man said to his mate, "Come, let us cast lots so we may learn on whose account this calamity has struck us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation? And where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Again, an interesting confession in light of his actions. He has a great confession of faith, testifying about this one God, the Lord our God creator, and yet his actions have betrayed him, haven't they? Then, verse 10, then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, "How could you do this?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. So they said to him, "What should we do to you that the sea may become calm for us?" For the sea was becoming increasingly stormy. He said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you, for I know that on account of me this great storm has come upon you." However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier against them. Then they called on the Lord and said, "We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us. For you, O Lord, have done as you have pleased." So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So you see, there was a lot going on before Jonah ever had the opportunity to preach a sermon to the Ninevites. What I want us to notice this morning is the behavior of people during times of stress. As Jonah goes through this time in the season of duress, as he is called upon to really experience exile. He's called to leave home, leave all things familiar, go to enemy territory, go to Nineveh, which is but a representation of the world at large. Go out into the world. So he has all these stressors that are going on in his life, never mind his disregard that he holds in his heart for the Ninevites. What I want us to notice, whether we're talking about a pandemic, whether we're talking about a missionary struggling with his call, specifically the place to which God has called him, experiencing stormy seas in life, finding himself in the belly of a great fish. In times of duress, things are exposed. Things are revealed about who we are. Our nature and our character, who we really are. I said a few weeks ago, just flippantly in passing, really wasn't part of the sermon, but just in passing, that one of my observations has been over these past 6-7 months of pandemic is you see people for who they really are. And by that I mean your characteristics and your qualities are really heightened and come to the forefront in all of this. But people who are very nice people before the pandemic, they're even nicer people, I've noticed, through the pandemic. People who were by nature mean before the pandemic, they're just meaner during the pandemic. People who were thoughtful, encouraging before the pandemic, they're just more thoughtful, more encouraging. People who were negative and critical before the pandemic, they're just more negative, critical and reactionary through the pandemic. So there's all these mixed emotions that come into play when we talk about the character of Jonah. And what is exposed in his life has really been exposed in each of our lives. See, the way you have to approach a book like Jonah and the character of Jonah is you have to allow yourself to be Jonah. Because truth of the matter is, whether you want to admit it or not, you are Jonah. I'm Jonah. And so you can't set yourself apart outside this story like you're some kind of protagonist in the story, when in fact it is written to remind us that we are all the antagonist in the story. What do we learn from this? What do we learn from Jonah? What was true of him that I need to be recognizing in me? What was exposed in him that has really been exposed in all of us during these days of pandemic? One of the things I see is that pandemic, any kind of duress and stressful situation, really exposes our theology. Now we've seen Jonah has a great confession. I mean, he made this bold confession of the Lord his God. And he even acknowledges there at the end of chapter 2 and verse 9, he said, he says salvation is from the Lord. God is the one that brings about salvation. God is the initiator of salvation. And throughout this story, we see God initiated the call of Jonah. He initiated the storm. He initiated the great fish. And he's initiated again this call to go and to preach to the Ninevites. And so what we see, especially as we read verses 1 through 10 in chapter 3, we see that Jonah's theology has been exposed, specifically his theology about salvation, the implications of salvation, what that means. Yeah, you say that salvation is from the Lord, but what you discover is he has a very narrow, exclusive, nationalistic view of salvation. Listen to these words. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time." Grace always is the redundant theme. A second time. God of a second chance. Always. The word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and proclaim to it the proclamation which I'm going to tell you." So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city of 3 days' walk. Then Jonah began to go through the city one day's walk, and he cried out and said, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown." Then the people of Nineveh believed in God. Can you believe that from that sermon? I mean, this guy can't preach his way out of a wet brown paper bag, and he gets this kind of response. I mean, what a contrast to the other prophets of Israel. I mean, here's a stranger, here's a guy like Jonah, a Hebrew, walking into a major Assyrian city and makes a proclamation like this, "Yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown." And the people believed in God. You jump ahead 100 years. Jeremiah is going to announce to God's people. And all the other prophets preach to God's people. It's like me preaching to the church. Prophets that we know, Jesus said Israel stoned their prophets. 100 years after Jonah, Jeremiah preached to the Israelites, the Jews, that Jerusalem was going to be overthrown. You know how God's people responded? They mocked him, they arrested him for treason, and threw him in prison. And yet here are pagans, not the people of God. Here are pagans responding to the preaching of God's word. The people of Nineveh believed in God, and they called a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. When the word reached the king of Nineveh, he arose from his throne, laid aside his robe, didn't give it lip service. Listen, he's not a king that's giving it lip service. But he took action, laid aside a robe from him, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat on the ashes. He issued a proclamation, and it said in Nineveh, "By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let man, beast, herd, or flock taste a thing. Do not let them eat or drink, but both man and beast must be covered with sackcloth, and let men call on God earnestly, that each may turn from his wicked way and from the violence which is in his hands." Who knows? God may turn and relent and withdraw his burning anger so that we will not perish. When God saw their deeds, that they turned from their wicked way, then God relented concerning the calamity which he had declared he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. which is the desire of God always. Regardless of what kind of killjoy stereotype you have conjured up in your mind regarding the nature and character of God, it is always, always the desire of God to relent. It was his desire for his own people, his called out people that would be Israel, and all they did was mock the prophets. And yet here is a pagan nation who responds and believes and repents. And God does what the heart of God always wants to do. He relents, and he did not do it. Jonah knows salvation comes from God. But in his soteriology, that's a theology of salvation. But in Jonah's theology of salvation, even though he knows it comes from the Lord, he cannot imagine a world where God's salvation means other people are going to have the same benefits that we have as those called by God, the Israelites, the Jews. And see, church, we have to avoid that same kind of narrowness, that same kind of exclusivism. I fear that we take so much comfort that the salvation of God is for us in here, that the true understanding of the salvation of God doesn't make us uncomfortable enough to realize that the true salvation of God is intended for those that are not here. That the salvation of God is not about works. It's not just about for people that look like they're deserving of God's grace and loving kindness. But if we understand God's salvation, more certainly if we understand the mission of the church and the purpose of the church, we understand that the church exists for the benefit of those who are not here. Now let that sink in. The church exists for the benefit of those that are not here, who are not yet here. Our challenge always as the church is to reach the next generation, or the church dies. Because human nature is, like the Israelites, human nature is to turn inward. It is to cocoon ourselves, to translate salvation into us and no one else. And we turn inward, and churches have a tendency to turn inward, to lose sight of their mission and purpose, which is outwardly focused, and to turn inward, to get more concerned about policies and procedures, how we do things, how are we taking care of me, how are we taking care of my needs, what about my group and our preferences. And when churches cross that threshold, and no longer is their intentional mission focus, no longer strategically are they thinking outside the walls of the church about how we interface with our community, how we reach people that are not here for the cause of Christ. And when we start thinking just inwardly, me and mine and my preferences, at that point all a church is doing is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You're just nailing nails in the coffin at that point. Because the salvation of God is of such a magnitude and such a scope. And the nature of his loving kindness is that it reaches into arenas that you would never imagine, because it looks like people that don't deserve it. Isn't that the story of Jesus? Isn't that what he was telling in the parable of the laborers in the field? The foreman or the master and the owner of the field, of a vineyard, went and hired workers one morning, agreed that the settled way they'd earn a day's wage, a denarius, which is a day's wage. But then the landowner went back out at the third hour of the day, 6th hour, 9th hour, 11th hour, and then when the full day is completed, those that came into the work, those that came into the vineyard in the 11th hour received the same denarius, the same wage as though they'd been working all day. And those that started early, they began to protest. This isn't right. This isn't fair. That's Jonah. I love the response of Jesus to those protests. He says, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own, or is your eye envious because I'm generous? Yes, the answer is yes for Jonah. He is envious. He's like the elder son in the story of the prodigal son, and the truth is the elder son's the prodigal son. You know, the older son in that story, was so upset about you've killed the fatted calf for this younger son of yours, my younger brother who went and took his share of the inheritance and wasted it on wild, riotous living. And here you are having a party for him when I'm the one that stayed. No, you might have been there, but you were never really there. You never really had a heart that was in the right place. That's Jonah. He can't imagine a world where people like the Ninevites, and you can fill in the blank with anything you want to. Jonah can't imagine a world where people like the Ninevites are the beneficiaries of God's grace and God's mercy. And I think the fact that Jonah's sermon was so effective, I think Jonah's sermon alone proves that salvation is from the Lord. That our involvement in this process of God's salvation being accomplished in the world, I think this just affirms it's not about our eloquence. It's not about the compelling arguments that you and I are able to fashion and build. Jesus would say, in explaining to Nicodemus the nature of the new birth, he would say, the wind blows where it wishes and you hear the sound of it, but do not know where it comes from and where it is going. So is everyone that is born of the Spirit. That's just the nature of salvation. That's why being on mission, that's why we're so redundant in that messaging. Being on mission where our feet are, when we are seeking to be on mission where we are, to be the presence of Christ, wherever my feet are, at school, in the grocery store, in the home, wherever, when I'm seeking to be on mission where my feet are, what I'm acknowledging with that kind of mindset is that God's salvation can be accomplished anywhere. Among anyone, at any time. And you and I, by being virtue of the presence of Christ, by allowing the fruit of the Spirit to be manifested in our life, in our actions, our attitudes, our words, we never know the cumulative effect that is going to have in the world. But a pandemic in times of duress can really expose your theology, and you can start closing in and trying to hide yourself from the world, where you just become insulated from the world around you. There's something else that's exposed, and this is the one that is screaming off the page. A pandemic, times of duress under which Jonah is dealing, it exposes our prejudices. It exposes our biases in life. When you're going through a season of duress, think about the past 7 months, what we're seeing in media and social media. You can see the prejudice here in Jonah's response. It says in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, but it greatly displeased Jonah. What displeased? The response of the Ninevites. The response of the king of Nineveh. National revival among a pagan people that now believe in God, that are repentant. It displeased Jonah. It made him angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, please, Lord, was not this what I said while I was in my own country? I never wanted to leave my own country. Listen, I don't mind preaching. I don't mind preaching at home. Lord, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be part of making Israel great again. But now you've stretched me, got me out of my comfort zone. I knew this was going to happen. Was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for death is better to me than life. The Lord said, do you have a good reason to be angry? I mean, really, this is your perspective on life, that you so despise this particular people group that you would rather be dead than live in a world where Ninevites are recipients of God's favor, His mercy, and His grace? I mean, what a contrast to Paul. Paul said in the Romans, I would wish myself accursed for the sake of my brethren. Paul said, I'd rather go to hell. If I could arrange it, I would take on hell myself. I would go to hell. I would exchange my salvation for the salvation of my brethren so that they could have the faith that I'm experiencing, that I have in my life. Not Jonah. Jonah says, in my world, I'd rather be dead than for people like these Ninevites to have the same kind of benefits that I have as a people of God. Listen, he gets it out there, doesn't he? I mean, this is Jonah's social media platform right here. It's just out there for people to see his anger. And aren't you kind of appalled? This is one who calls himself a believer in God, a man called by God to be a prophet. I mean, are you shocked? I mean, I think it's shocking to see this kind of hatred, to see this kind of anger on his social media platform. I wonder if the world is no less shocked by some of the things they see on our social media platform. Things that perpetuate hate, vitriol, division. Oh, and we take definitive statements in our arrogance, and we post things like, I just don't understand how a true Bible-believing Christian could support someone like that, or someone who could support that. When all the time, on the other side of the conversation, there is someone no less genuine and sincere in you, in their confession, that are saying the same thing. Listen, no one is ever compelled by anything they read on social media. You know, I'm 62 years old, and when I'm on social media checking out, making sure my daily devotion is being posted and that sort of thing, and I just begin scrolling through some of that stuff. Let me tell you, in my years, I've never thought, well, you know, dadgummit, I thought this, but now after reading their compelling argument on Facebook, or after, you know, seeing that video that guy made down in the valley, boy, he swayed me. It's never happened. You don't win people over on social media, but you can undo your witness on social media. When you're a perpetuator of hate and anger, the Southern Poverty Law Center, on their website they have, and it's an ever-changing number, there are 602 hate groups in this country. It's a staggering number. 602 organized, recognized, identifiable hate groups. You and I have a responsibility to make sure that those who know us as Christians, you and I have the responsibility and the obligation to make sure that the church is not perceived as one of those hate groups. This time of tension, this time of duress, it exposes our prejudices and our biases. We have to be on our guard. We don't want to become like Jonah. Jonah is really the patron saint. Listen, Jonah is the patron saint of all those who smile at the misfortune of others. He was a happy saint when he thought the Ninevites were going to be punished, when he thought the judgment of God was going to come down upon them. Inside Jonah's heart, there was a smile. He is the patron saint of all people who secretly and privately celebrate the misfortune of others. And by that, we're all indicted, aren't we? I'm talking about incidences like, say, the woman who's always posting on Facebook about how wonderful her marriage is. Always on, can't imagine life without this man. You know, it gets to a point where you're thinking, oh yeah, that does protest too much. You're trying to convince yourself of that. Goes on, I can't imagine life without this man. And then apparently he was thinking a lot about life without her because he had an affair and now they're divorced. Secretly, you smile within. Or the big high school reunions coming up. Man, you've been working hard the past 6 months. And you've been fasting and starving to get back down to your high school weight. And you celebrate when you get there. You secretly smile when you see that stud quarterback or the beauty queen, and they're 80 pounds heavier than last time you saw them. Inwardly, we smile. That's Jonah. We have to be on guard against our prejudices, our biases, because they're being exposed during a time of pandemic. Final thing, very quickly, I want to notice what a pandemic and times of duress expose. They expose our priorities. Notice in verse 5, then Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself and sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. So the Lord appointed, again, God taking the initiative, so the Lord appointed a plant, and it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort. And Jonah was extremely, underscore that, extremely happy about the plant. But God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day, and it attacked the plant, and it withered. When the sun came up, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head so that he became faint and begged with all his soul to say, death is better to me than life. This guy is a whiner deluxe. Then God said to Jonah, do you have good reason to be angry about the plant? And he said, I have good reason to be angry even to death. In other words, God, you're wrong, I'm right. Then the Lord said, you had compassion on the plant for which you did not work and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? You know, this book is the only book in the Bible that ends with a question. And we really don't know if Jonah had a change of heart. But what we do know and what we can see is that his priorities were misplaced. I mean, to have this much delight in a plant. I mean, this plant made him extremely happy. I mean, it's a word that is very emphatic. It's a euphoria that he was experiencing over this plant, and that's really and then when the plant is lost. Lord makes it clear, he really didn't have a vested interest in the plant. The plant came up overnight and it perished overnight. You know, he's not grieving for the plant, he's grieving for his own discomfort. He's grieving over the discomfort that he's experiencing in his own life. All this plant did was give you a sense of momentary pleasure. But what we should note here, well, this is the real lesson, I think, for all of us when it comes to arranging and thinking about our priorities in life. It's interesting to note that while this plant made him extremely happy, it also made him miserable when he was gone. Brought great euphoria, but it made him miserable when it disappeared, which is the nature of all earthly things. You see, the plant is really a metaphor for the temporal things of this world. They'll give you a momentary pleasure. You can get sucked up in this vortex of chasing after everything that this world has to offer you, and you get caught. This satisfies at this moment. This gives you a sense of euphoria at this moment, whether it's a purchase or whether it's music, the arts, whatever it is, drink, food, whatever it is at this moment that gives you such pleasure, well, that's going to go away. Then you've got to do it again and again and again, and to greater heights and greater extremes. Always trying to replace that euphoria. And when it's gone, you're just miserable. And so my prayer is this in closing. My prayer for you and for me as Jonahs. My prayer is that we will use this time of pandemic, that we will use this tension that we all feel in the air, that we will use this time of duress for self-examination. Because this is a window of time that I pray we never have to have again, this unique window of opportunity that we have to really sit and contemplate and think about our lives. What are our values? What are our priorities? To see them and to recognize them, and then to make corrections while we have the opportunity. That this world might not swallow us whole.